Welcome back to another episode of What's Up, Prof? Welcome, Walter.
Hi, Martin.
It looks like you're doing well.
Well, our topic is such that we have to be in a cheerful mood.
Yes. It's a very important subject that we're talking about, and it has to be an encouraging subject.
I hope
Even though
so.
it sometimes look as if we're negative, that's not the aim.
No.
We want to uplift the church. So let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, thank you very much for another discussion that we can have. We ask again that you please enlighten our minds, bless the discussion, and have your angels surround us in this important matter. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So we're continuing with nothing against the truth, but for the truth, right?
Yeah.
And the aim of this whole effort is to show that no matter how negative things might appear, God is still in control.
Yeah.
And the other aim is to show, even if you think that everything is wrong in a particular area of the work, there's always something that's also right in a particular area of the work. And when we look at it from our human perspective, we can despair.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look back over time, then you start understanding what God is doing. You can do nothing against the truth. You can only do something for the truth. So even if powers that be introduce very, very negative things, then the Lord permits that to create awareness and debate on the issue and enable each individual within that sphere of influence to make a personal decision for or against.
Yeah.
And it's like a great sieve that is being applied.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, Martin, let me just say one more thing. If you want to apply a great sieve, and you want to introduce things that will cause, or let's say you want to permit certain issues to be introduced that will cause a debate and people to think, it's no good introducing it by someone who has no influence. So the obvious target to bring in negative things will always be in the upper echelons of leadership.
Yes.
But that doesn't make all of leadership negative or obsolete.
Very important.
That's a very, very important point, because we are so prone to categorizing and demonizing a whole institution because of the decisions of a number of people.
Yes, like you said in the previous one, this level is okay, this level there's something wrong. No.
No.
In everyone there's...
This is God's church from the top to the bottom. And yes, there will be a shaking. And yes, the Bible even says that the Lord will cut off the head and the tail. That doesn't mean that everybody in the head is going to be cut off, but that many of the ideas that have been inculcated, even in the head, will be cut off. The same happened in the time of Jesus, as we spoke before. Not everybody was cut off. In fact, hundreds of priests and leaders came out and accepted the truth and stood for truth and righteousness, even in the face of opposition, right?
Correct.
It'll be the same at the end. So I'm hoping that the stories which I have to tell in my personal life, because as we said last time, these are not things you normally talk about. And there's a 6-part testimony of my life on the internet. But I'm sure we could make a 6 or a more part one on what happened behind the scenes as well. And I just want to say that this is not being done to be vindictive, but as encouragement.
That's the thing. Because a lot of people will have a personal experience of this, and when it becomes personal, then it rattles you.
Correct.
So this is to give people that have personal experience hope.
Yes. And if you take any of the biblical figures, those that stood for the truth, that stood for the word, that stood for the testimony, they always had the wind from the front.
Always.
And as Martin Luther already said, wherever there's a true Christianity, it's upstream. It's never going to be downstream.
No. We had the promise from Jesus himself.
And look how they treated Jeremiah. Look how they treated Isaiah. Look how they treated any of those. There are very few that were embraced and accepted.
Yeah.
And most of them had a very hard time.
Exactly.
So why should it be different? So let's start again by reading from the testimonies. Never did this message apply with greater force than it applies today. More and more the world is setting at naught the claims of God. Men have become bold in transgression. The wickedness of the inhabitants of the world has almost filled up the measure of their iniquity. This earth has almost reached the place where God will permit the destroyer to work his will upon it. The substitution of the laws of men for the laws of God, the exaltation by merely human authority of Sunday in place of the Bible Sabbath, is the last act in the drama. When this substitution becomes universal, God will reveal himself. He will arise in his majesty to shake terribly the earth. He will come out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the world for their iniquity, and the earth shall disclose her blood and shall no more cover her slain. You know, in the past they always say, yes, but where's this thing that you're always talking about that will happen, right?
Yes, yes.
When is this ever going to happen? It is the last act in the drama.
The last one.
Why? Because it is the ultimate attack on the authority of God. Because the Sabbath commandment is the only commandment that asserts the authority of the lawgiver.
Exactly.
Because he's the creator, and he is your redeemer, and he is the one who has the authority to put his stamp in the light of his title, the creator of the universe, onto that law. It's the law of authority.
Exactly.
None of the others contain that authoritative statement, that legal aspect to make the law binding.
Yeah.
So it'll be the last one that he will attack.
That doesn't mean there will not be other acts in the drama.
Correct.
It actually just tells you there will be other acts. And
Correct.
Also that authority on the law, especially the Sabbath,
Yes.
when you choose between the two, either you go for it or not, your allegiance to whom you are
Correct.
giving authority is perfectly shown.
The other thing that's very important, we also stated in previous discussions that we had, that when you look at that prophecy of Daniel, or where the abomination of desolation will put its footprint, even in that portion where it should not be, even within the very church, right? So we can expect that. We can expect that. That doesn't make the whole church apostate, but we will find elements of that. Now, in the last discussion that we had, in our first one in this series, we looked particularly at the evolution creation situation, and we mentioned the health aspect to a certain degree, that was also highly problematic, right?
Yes.
And that portion will become more and more prominent as we see events unfold in the future. So what did we not speak about? We didn't speak about these other aspects about who makes this law of God void and who are his associates. Now, surely, if he knows there's an enemy that is going to expose him on this issue, he will make every effort to counteract that at the level of the church.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a logical strategy.
It has to go from inside best way.
Correct. This is a war. And in every war, you will employ that strategy. You will even drop leaflets over enemy territory to indoctrinate the man on the street, the foot soldier, as to, the way he should think, etc. So, and you will use the radio waves and the media and everything that you can do to influence mind upon mind. Yeah. Now, when we looked at the issue of creation evolution, what was the sticking point when it came to the church? Evolution versus creation. There were many in the church that were evolutionists. They shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. They should find another church where they can believe what they like. Yeah. I was an evolutionist, and it said in 6 days the Lord created. That was very hard to get my mind around that. Yeah. But that's the basis of the Sabbath. And if you accept the Sabbath, then you accept the 6-day creation. Otherwise, you reject the Bible. Correct. So if you don't want that, then don't call yourself an Adventist. Then go and find yourself a place where you can believe what you want to believe. Right? But the sticky issue was the time frame. The short time frame versus a longer time frame. And even from the highest echelons of leadership, it was blatantly said that when the spirit of prophecy refers to 6,000 years, then the author of the spirit of prophecy was influenced by the margin of the King James Version.
Yes.
Now, that is an incredible statement to make. Furthermore, those same individuals in those echelons of power said, yes, we agree that she had the same inspiration as any of the other prophets, but not the same authority. Now that's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
If God speaks through someone and he gives the same inspiration, then that inspiration must have exactly the same authority as any other, right?
It must have, because otherwise it is totally useless.
Correct. Now, we've discussed that before when we discussed the veracity of the spirit of prophecy. So those are issues that make your antenna go up. So in my life, my filter is the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. That is what I believe. I don't have to believe anything else. If there is something in addition, a creed, for example, then that creed can only be accepted if it's in harmony with the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. The same with anybody else. Whatever they tell you, no matter how high they are in the organization, if it doesn't harmonize with the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, then for me personally, I reject it. Absolutely. And I can give you a few examples. My story in Europe is not a very rosy one. I've had some very bumpy roads to travel. And the evolution and creation debate was just one of them. But that was still a minor ripple. When it came to the health issue, it became a major ripple. But when it came to the spiritual aspects, then it became a nuclear war. That's the way it is, right? Now, very early on in my career as an evangelist, I not only spoke about science, that was still acceptable to a degree, not with everyone. But when I started venturing to speak about the religious aspects, then the opposition became very vociferous. Let me put it that way. And this is a very interesting story. Now, why did I feel compelled to go into that kind of discussion? Because of my background.
Yeah.
I came out of a world of atheism, but I was involved in occultism. And through the associations that I had a reasonable knowledge of the operation of secret societies. And I'd actually been in the temples where these channels were communicating messages from the other world to high officials in sport and government and medicine. It's always interesting. It's always those three. Sport, government, medicine. And then behind the scenes, the churches were involved.
Yeah.
And when I was with that one channel, the channel for Africa, when I was in his home, then it became blatantly clear that his connection with the theological schools was a very strong one, which is amazing, because what has Luciferianism got to do with theological schools, right? Now, many of those that grow up in this church and end up in positions of leadership have never dabbled in anything of that nature.
Yeah.
They cannot even comprehend it. To them, it is a fairy tale, right? But this is, in actual fact, the fact of the matter. And then we have those hundreds of statements on secret societies in the spirit of prophecy.
Yes.
And then they want to tell me that the secret societies has nothing to do with our message. Where she blatantly says that if you study the secret societies, then you will understand what John is speaking about in the book of Revelation. So how do you get those two together, right? And so I started off with lectures, because I came out of Babylon, on the wine of Babylon, because I had to get my mind around it. What was wrong with the Babylonian doctrine? What was wrong with the doctrine of Catholicism? And we did a number of what's up, the doctrine of the serpent, right? I mean, it's very wrong. It's blatantly wrong. And so when I started lecturing on the wine of Babylon, and I brought in all those images to show that what they were teaching at the theological level in many, many institutes in the world was Babylonian wine.
Yeah.
And so one of my first lectures on this topic was the wine of Babylon. And then I started talking about secret societies. Now that freaked people out. They hadn't seen it from that angle, and so many were upset. And then, of course, when you're talking about Babylon, you have to identify Babylon.
Yes.
You have to say who the beast is. What's the point of saying, come out of Babylon, and you don't tell the person what Babylon is, right?
100%.
It's meaningless.
Yeah.
So come out of Babylon. So you have to define Babylon. You have to say who the beast is, and you have to say why is Babylon, and what his wine is. And then you have to identify the dragon, which is spiritism, which is the belief in what Satan told Eve in the Garden of Eden. And that, according to the scripture, is a lie.
Yes.
So you have to expose that, right? Now, if you are dabbling in ecumenical relationships, then this becomes very, very embarrassing. Right? Let's be quite plain about this. Let's say this blatantly. Our church officially is not supposed to be affiliated with ecumenical relations.
Yes.
It's very clear in the spirit of prophecy, and anything to the contrary is something that happens because people feel that that might be an avenue of creating better ties.
Yeah.
However it happens, it doesn't matter. But in the past, God always said you must be a separate people.
That's it. And if you, like you said earlier, are exposing and telling the people to get out of there, you can't go in there yourself.
Then you have a problem. Correct. And then the big driving force, that fire that is in your soul, that you cannot quench, is to go and warn the people. Because why should they die? If they could understand, they could accept the truth, and they could come out of those systems and embrace the truth. What an amazing turnaround that would be, right?
If I may ask a question here, how many people that have accepted the message and came out of there, came to you and said, Why did you get me out of there?
No, they all said thank you.
That's it.
Every single one of them. And if the person who brought me into the faith hadn't told me who the beast was, of which I was part, because I was raised a Roman Catholic,
Yeah.
then how would I have known to come out of it, right?
Correct.
So very early on, when I started off with those first lectures, the Wine of Babylon and Revelation chapter 13, I got a phone call from one of the leadership in Europe, in fact, from the highest echelon of leadership in Europe, from the division. And it had been advertised what I was going to speak on, and there was a pamphlet that had been printed as to what my lectures were going to be. Some were on science, on evolution, but there were also other lectures that dealt with these issues, such as the Wine of Babylon, for example. So I get this phone call from this official, and he tells me, in the middle of the night, late at night, he phones me and tells me that I may speak only on science. I may not give those lectures. But they'd been advertised, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the pamphlets had been out, the posters were out, they'd been advertised. And I was supposed to do a campaign, right? So he tells me I'm not allowed to do that. So I said to him, why? Why can't I do that? What's wrong with it? And he said to me, you are going to call the Pope Antichrist. And we don't want you to do that. And I said, why? Don't you believe it? And he said, it's antiquated theology. I said, that's very strange. Because in the spirit of prophecy, it's very clear that this is the problem.
And you're supposed to expose the man of sin.
And you're exposed, it tells you quite plainly, you have to expose the wickedness of the man of sin who has made the Sunday law a distinctive mark of his character, right? And so I said to him, excuse me, but do you believe the spirit of prophecy? And he said to me, that is 19th century outdated thinking. I was stunned. Now, I didn't expect that, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm in this church, I think everybody's on this page.
This were when you were still new.
Very new. This is very early on. This is one of my first appearances in Europe. And I was taken aback, and I thought, wow, this comes from the highest echelon. Now, I'm not saying that everybody in that echelon was on the same page as this particular individual, but nevertheless, that's what he said to me. And so I thought about it while he was talking, and then I said to him, I'm sorry, I cannot do what you are saying. So he said, why not? So I said, because you're not a Seventh-day Adventist. Whoa.
I can imagine.
He exploded on the other end. So I said, no, you're not, because when I came into this church, I accepted the points that were on the baptismal certificate, and I accepted those as part and parcel of the teachings of this denomination, and you are telling me that I should go contrary to that conviction, so therefore you are not, in my opinion, a Seventh-day Adventist. I will not listen to you. That was it. I gave my lectures. Now, obviously, that was in the time when I was young and feisty.
Now you're just feisty.
No, now it's just young. And it must have been like throwing down the gauntlet to some of these people. So this created quite an atmosphere of animosity in those that were of like mind as this particular individual in leadership. Now, the president of that division at that time, he was an extremely liberal man when it comes to what we believe. And for example, in his time, the things that came into the church were spiritual formation, Willow Creek theology, celebration style worship. They would take whole churches and change them into celebration type churches. They would basically get rid of those old conservative people that were Bible-based, spirit of prophecy-based, that didn't want to go in that direction, and they would engage the youth and bring this in. And to me, this was blatant apostasy at the highest level. In fact, this particular individual was extremely antagonistic to what I was preaching, for example. And I had a phone call or two with him, and even meetings were arranged which never materialized. Even though I had an appointment, he didn't pitch. And so I realized that, even if he is the president of a division, if he doesn't speak in harmony with the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, I will ignore him when it comes to these things.
And your reaction wasn't arrogant.
I hope not. I try to be respectful, but if they speak totally against what the spirit of prophecy is saying, then I have to put it through that filter. And I also feel that I had a particular calling.
Yes, that's
to
what
give
I'm
a particular message within the framework of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. And why should I listen to someone who goes exactly contrary to that kind of situation, right?
Yes. If you bring back the stories of the Bible, was Elijah arrogant when he was speaking to the king?
No, he was not arrogant. He was just forthright. He said, I'm not the trouble of Israel, when they accused him.
Yeah, and
you are the trouble of Israel because you're not sticking to what you know is right? And so, I was not the only one. There were many that were extremely upset by all the liberal things that were coming in. And spiritual formation comes directly from the Jesuits.
Yeah.
It is a Jesuitical teaching. And there are 2 lectures of mine about the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformation, where I address that issue. And that caused major problems, because some of these individuals would bring that into our colleges. Now, that very division man that phoned me and told me that the Pope is not the Antichrist, and that is antiquated doctrine, he became a professor at one of our leading colleges in Germany. So if that's the kind of liberal theology that is being taught to pastors, then you have a problem with that. And so obviously the 2 ideologies are going to be in conflict. Now here's the question again, or the kicker. Why does God permit it?
Yeah.
Why?
To get it to stand up, to get a debate on it.
To open up the debate so that people can make a decision. So when they start these churches, these let your hair down churches, they literally basically call them like that.
Yeah.
The one church had written on it, lass mal locker. In English you would say, let your hair down, do what thou wilt, let's have some fun. And people took exception to it and said, this is not right. And when they start bringing in the drums and the things, Ellen White says quite plainly, one of the very last things that will happen is they will bring drums into the worship service. Yeah. And you find this everywhere in the world. Now, I've had some amazing experiences. But let me tell you how God works.
Can I just ask, before you tell us the story, the names, that even had names for these projects. One project, Emerging Church, so it was a whole movement.
Correct.
And it's still alive and kicking.
Correct. Now, some of these people were very prominent, right? They were division presidents, and even at the very highest echelon. at General Conference level. They were bringing in all of these things. Can we have coffee churches? Well, let's talk about it. Let's do that. Let's change this into rather than these old-fashioned solemn worship services. Let's bring it on. And there were many that were opposed to that, but they had the power, and so it started happening within the church. But Martin, you must always remember that this church, officially at least, has a bottom-up structure.
Yes.
If somebody makes a decision up there, that decision is not binding. It is not a decision that has been made by a conference called together, world conference called together at a session where decisions on the way forward will be made.
And those decisions are representative of the whole body.
Of the whole body. So there are many that will do their thing and they think that they represent the church. Now those individuals that think like that, even if they are in the highest position of the church, do not represent what the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy says on the issue, and therefore they do not represent me either. And they can go and sit, if they want to, and vote on issues such as creation, and vote against it. They don't represent me. And not until the whole church has made a decision to reject, let's say, the 6-day creation, will I have to make a decision. Do I still want to stand with the church?
That's it.
But because an individual, even if it is the highest individual, makes a decision like that, that's his problem. Right? So, treat them with respect, treat them with kindness if you can, but when it comes to what is right and what is wrong, you have to stand like Elijah.
Yes.
You have to say, like Martin Luther, here I stand, I can do no other, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. Because the two are obviously not in harmony.
Yes, it's important to remember that they become objects of evangelism.
Correct, absolutely. Well said, Martin. They become objects of evangelism, and you hope that, like that young man I spoke about the other time, that he will come to some introspection on this issue. Correct. Now, you yourself, when you came into this church, you were confronted with issues of spiritual formation, and you say, whoa, what's going on here, didn't you?
Yes, and it was also high up. We were part of an outreach organization in the church, and there was some training material. And under the training material, there were books written by professors in spiritual formation from secular universities, not part of the Adventist universities. And I questioned this with leadership. And to this day,
it hasn't been resolved.
Yes.
Well, I can also say I had a discussion with a conference president in the North American continent. And he took me to task because I spoke against spiritual formation. And so I sat in his office, he and the secretary, and they weren't exactly on the same page as I was. In fact, they were on the other page. And so they were taking me to task on the issue. And one of the books that I had quoted was from an ex-Quaker, which was Richard Foster. And it was on spiritual formation and how you bring this into the church. And they took exception to that. And he blatantly said to me in my face that Richard Foster was as inspired as Ellen G. White. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. Only problem is the one is inspired from above and the other one from below. And that, of course, ended the discussion. It's not possible to have a compromise on that issue.
Not at all. And you must remember, like you said earlier, the spiritual exercises that's part of spiritual formation has its roots with Ignatius Loyola.
Absolutely.
And even if it's got a nice sugar-coated Christian garb, it's still rooted there.
Correct. And I got an invitation to speak at one of our colleges that had introduced spiritual formation at the highest level. And of course, they were very upset that I was actually invited to that place. But they booked a hall, and the people that came, I mean, there were hundreds of them. And it was so obvious that there was an absolute divide within even that university, that college, and that there were those that were for it and those that were against it. And the staff members, some of them had been intimidated, even asked to sign certain papers that they accept the way in which they were going to go. And they were highly indignant because, when you accept this truth, you do it on the basis of careful study and conviction.
Yes.
Isn't that it?
It's a walk.
Would you come into this church of your own free will? Oh, well, maybe it's a good idea to become an Adventist. Would you?
It's the last church you'll choose.
Yes. I think it's easier to go to the Church of Satan than to make the decision to come into this denomination, right?
The world will accept you much easier.
Correct. So once you've made that decision and you've based it on the facts and you've studied the issue, when you come into contact with people within the church, most of them, sadly, I must say, are people that were never part of the outside world and never had to make that decision. They were fortunate enough to be born into it. But surely there are also enemies within the camp that have brought in some ideas. And we've already said, who's who in the zoo, we do not have to say. But basically, if you have come into this denomination, then you have done it on the basis of careful study. And therefore, it is not so easy for them to twist your thinking because you've already made a decision,
No,
right?
you've had to make big decisions and leave things that you used to think were true behind and made a lot of changes.
Now, when you discovered that, whoa, there are spiritual formation things here, what did you do? Did you continue, or what did you do? Or did you leave that organization, or what did you do?
Well, the first thing I did was I thought, okay, maybe somewhere this crept in, and unknowingly. So I tried to bring it to the fore. But then afterwards I realized, okay, this is not going anywhere. But we were part of this organization, and we were led by God. If He decided we must stay there and stay a beacon or whatever, we would do that. But He changed our direction. And that's a whole other story.
That's a different story.
Eventually, He was also, the whole trend of what we are doing is nothing can be done against the truth, but for the truth.
Correct.
So out of this, God eventually changed our direction. But He wanted to test us. If we are fully devoted to Him and to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy.
Okay.
And so He changed our route, and that's how we ended up with amazing discoveries.
So in other words, the conflict that arises around a particular issue, let's say spiritual formation, and you study the issue and you show that it is a Jesuitical concept. If it is a Jesuitical concept, you can't, as you say, sugarcoat it and present it as truth. It has inherent toxins in it. And so this creates a divide, and there will be decision-making right through the ranks. And everybody has to decide for themselves.
That's it.
I'll go along with this, or I will reject it. And this is part of the shaking. So if you now come and you give a lecture against spiritual formation, they will automatically say you are dividing and splitting the church.
Yeah.
If you give a lecture on plant-based diet, they will say you are splitting the church. No, it is the doctrine that is creating the shaking.
That's it.
The individual is irrelevant.
He's the messenger.
It's just a messenger. Nobody has to follow Martin Smith.
No.
Nobody has to follow Walter Fight. Is this truth or is this not truth that is being presented?
Exactly.
That is where you base your decision. Another issue that then arose, because a lot of antagonism regarding my stand on Babylon and Babylonian doctrine, of which spiritual formation and Willow Creek methodology, which is a very emotional way of presenting the gospel, and it is in a sense also spiritual formation because it elaborates and dramatizes whatever the gospel story says. And the spirit of prophecy is very clear that any form of drama is contrary to what God wants us to do, because the truth must do the cutting, not the emotional flavorings that surround it, right? But it's amazing, Martin, that once you become attuned to it and you start recognizing it, then no matter where it comes from, put it aside.
Yeah.
Because it is dangerous. It will take your mind away from the plain truths of the Bible and put you on an emotional train that can infiltrate your mind with any concept, because you'll go into an alpha rhythm.
Yeah. Maybe if there are viewers or listeners that are more interested to find out exactly what this constitutes, the spiritual formation, those two lectures are the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformation, and I'll again put those two links in.
Okay. Now another issue that arose then was the issue of Bible translations. Now, Martin, what had happened was I had read Wilkinson's book, our authorized version, Vindicated. And I took the Bibles and I checked whether this was so. And I took my NIV Bible and I compared it with the King James Bible, and I compared it with the New King James Bible. And in the German versions, I compared the old Luther Bible to the modern Luther Bible, and the Elberfelder Bible with the Schlachter Bible. And I then read all the literature of the committee that sat to put together the Schlachter Bible, which is basically like the King James Version. And what the reasons were why they had reverted back to the received text. And I had such an excitement because I discovered this issue, right? Now, unbeknown to me, of course, this behind the scenes was going to create another great war. Now, this is often how it happens. If you are forewarned about something, you might stay off that territory. But me, in my naive enthusiasm, I worked out 2 lectures on Bible translations. And the way it came about that I gave those lectures and where I gave those lectures shows to me that even if something very negative comes out of it, in God's providence, something positive can come out of it, right? So I was invited by a group of people, by a church, to come and do an evangelistic campaign in Europe and in Germany. I was invited to come and do this campaign. And unbeknown to me, this little town where I gave this meeting was right next to this university where that division man became a professor that didn't believe in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, and where that division president phoned me and lambasted me about everything that I was doing, whereas he was bringing in spiritual formation and all of these things into the church. So we didn't sit at the same table. And now, how did I get there? I mean, this is a little town somewhere in the East Bloc of Germany, right? Just after the Iron Curtain came down.
Yeah.
And I had to fly to Berlin, and I was picked up by a gentleman. And it's an amazing story, because this man was quite a new convert to Seventh-day Adventism. And we were sitting in a car for a number of hours, traveling from the airport to this place. And of course we were talking. I didn't know the man at all. And we were talking about how he came to embrace these truths. And he told me an amazing story. He was in the East German military, and one of his jobs was to see that nobody escapes across that wall, when the wall was still there. And he was an ardent communist and an atheist. And that was his job. And he would make sure that nobody ever got out of Germany, right? He was on fire for the communist ideology. And in the course of his career, he had occasions when he went to the West. He was one of the few that could leave the country and go to the West to recruit for the cause, right? Yeah. For the communist cause. And he also dealt with occult issues within the military, like UFO things, and very interesting career in terms of the military. And then when and he also occasionally came into contact with a particular person that he found very interesting, and that person must have been an Adventist. And when he discussed some of these things with that person told him, no, that's occult. You shouldn't go there. But he didn't know what that meant. But somewhere he filed in his head that person was an Adventist, and he was interesting, but he wasn't on that page. And then when the wall fell, his whole ideology collapsed, right? And from one day to the next, he was no longer in the employ of the East Germans. He was now in the employ of the West Germans, because the West German government took over the military, right? Yeah. And when he got his first paycheck, there was a deduction on it that had never been there before. And it was for church tax. And he looked at this and it totally freaked him out. Because in Germany, they deduct church tax. And that tax goes to the mainline churches, depending on, which one is there.
That tax is like a tithe.
It's like a tithe, you could say that, correct. So, what is this? So, if you didn't want to pay that, then you had to explain why you didn't want to pay it. So he marched off to the new military leaders and said, excuse me, what is this here? And they said, it's a church tax. And he says, I don't want a church tax deducted. And then he said, well, then you have to not be part of a church. So he asked, well, what does this mean? They said to him, you must resign from your church, then you don't pay taxes. And he said, but I don't even know what church I belong to. So they laughed, these West German new leaders. And then he said to them, well, what is the largest church here in this area? And they said, the Lutheran Church. And he said, right, so I will officially resign from the Lutheran Church. So he wrote a letter resigning from the Lutheran Church so that he didn't have to pay that tax anymore. And that weekend he went home and he told his parents about what happened, his elderly parents, and they said to him, you resigned from the wrong church. You were born a Catholic. Now, typically German efficiency, he went back to the leaders and said, excuse me, I resigned from the wrong church. Here's my new letter. I'm resigning now from the Catholic Church. They laughed like drains. So there he was. His ideology was shattered. And so he thought, now what am I going to do? And so he remembered that name, Seventh-day Adventist. Now I'm telling his story. It's years ago, and I don't even know if I'm getting it absolutely right. So if I've got a fact wrong here or there, but this is the gist of the matter. I found it fascinating. So he looks up in the telephone directory whether there are any Adventist institutions there. He didn't even know it was a church. Okay. So he arrives there and he finds one, and they let him enter, and he says, well, he wants to join this club. He thought it was a club. So what do you guys do? No, we come together on the Sabbath, on a Saturday. All right, what time, etc. There he arrives. So he did that a couple of times, and then he said to them, excuse me, what is this? What kind of a club is this? When you come here and you sit here every Saturday and you talk about all of these things. What do you do? A club must do something, you know. Either you play ball or you have sports or whatever. You just come and sit here. This is meaningless. What are you guys doing? And in any case, how do I become a member of the club? They said, no, you must first have Bible studies and you must be baptized. He said, he thought it was a ritual. So he said, okay, let's get on with it here. Let's do this. They said, no, it's not so easy. You must first do this, that, and the other. But of course, in East Germany, you know, the faith had been undermined for 80 years. So what was left of the original faith was vague, to say the least. And then eventually the pastor of whatever church that was said to him, you know, if you really want to do something, the government gave back all the confiscated material, because during the occupation of the Russians, they confiscated all the churches and all the church material. But typically German, they had marked them and labeled them and stored them neatly in warehouses somewhere, and all this stuff was returned to the churches. So here they had boxes and boxes full of stuff. And they had an incinerator and they were cleaning up. So they said, you know, if you have time after work on a Wednesday, come around and help us to clean up. So that's what he did. And they were incinerating old papers that were, you know, 80 years old already. And so he found boxes and he went to the pastor and he said, I found these boxes with all these books in them. What do I do with them? And he looked at them and he said, no, these books are outdated. You can put them in the incinerator. And he said, what kind of books are these? Are these Adventist books? And they said, yes, they're Adventist books. Now, why do you want to incinerate them? Because they're outdated. They don't matter anymore. And he thought, but they're Adventist books. So he took them home. And it was Spirit of Prophecy books. Uh-huh. And so he started reading Great Controversy and all of these books. And he realized that these people that were in the church no longer believed the Spirit of Prophecy.
They were not Adventists.
And he came to the conclusion that he had now rediscovered Adventism and that he was the only Adventist in the country. He didn't know. And nobody else believed this. And now, you know, East Germany was in a big turmoil. And so eventually he went from town to town to town, and he tried to find people that still believed these writings. And it's an amazing story, right? And eventually they found a group together of about 25 people or something in that region that still believed that. And so they decided, let's all come together and create a church where everybody still believes that. And that's the church that invited me.
No.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So they believed the Spirit of Prophecy, and they thought, well, let's evangelize. And that's why they said, let's invite someone who believes the same as we do. So they invited me, right? I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know that it was right next to that university. And so when it was broadcast that I would come and give lectures there, the rector of that university, who, by the way, apparently, according to some sources, said about the Spirit of Prophecy that you cannot be dictated to by a woman with only 3 years of education, to which I then quipped, well, if God speaks to you through a donkey, you better listen, let alone a woman with 3 years of education. But in any case, he wrote a letter to all the students forbidding them to come to my lectures.
Okay. That probably didn't go well.
That backfired in a big, big way. So he wrote this letter to all the student body and said they weren't allowed to attend my lectures. And of course, you don't do that to a student. No matter of what country, no matter where, you don't do that to a student. Best advertisement he could have sent out, they were all there. But when I got to that first evening, they had arranged such a show. In this little town, they had the mayor there with the mayor's chain around them. They had an band. Can you believe that? An band. And the band was going oompa, oompa, oompa. It was a real old German thing. It was very interesting, very nice. And the hall was full, and all of these students sitting there as well. And I started my lectures, and I got onto the stage. And as I got onto the stage, a man came walking to the front where I was standing. I was about to start after the introductions and the band and the mayor's speech and what have you. And he came to me and he put his finger in my nose. And he said to me, "Are you going to preach the three angels' messages?" I thought, he was weird. Maybe he's not quite compos mentis or whatever. But I was quite taken aback, and I said, well, if he knows about the three angels' messages, he must be an Adventist, right? So I said, yes, I'm going to preach the three angels' messages. And he turned round and he shouted to that entire hall, "This man is from the devil. He's going to preach the three angels' messages. Get out! Everybody here, get out! This man is from the devil." Oh, and I started praying, and I said, "Lord, help, what's going on here now?" And the mayor was looking, and the band was looking, and it was a strange occurrence. And I prayed, "Lord," and he went through the aisles, and he shouted at the people, "Get out, get out! Get out, this is from the devil, it's the three angels' messages." And I prayed, and then he just walked out the door. And he carried on shouting down the street or wherever he went. I don't know where he went, I was on the inside. So I thought, okay, now I have to calm the nerves of everybody again, and I'm sweating. And so calm everybody down. I said, that was a very strange occurrence. I apologize for whatever happened. I don't know how that happened. It's not part of the script, but it's an interesting introduction, so let's continue. So I greeted everyone again, and I just started talking when a lady somewhere on the left-hand side in one of the chairs suddenly goes, "Ah!" Boom, falls off a chair. Big consternation. Everybody's running around. Is there a doctor in the room? The doctors go, and they're working with the lady. And I'm saying, "Lord, there's so much activity here. There's so much opposition." And I prayed quietly there for the lady, and they took her off into a side room. And she recovered. So she came back in, and as far as I know, she sat and listened to the rest. I don't know what she had, whatever. But that's how it started. Yeah. So immediately you know, something's going down here. And so you pray, and you know that you are on very dangerous ground. And I gave my normal series of lectures, as I normally do, starting with evolution, creation, and going on to the other topics and the biblical topics. And then I had the wine of Babylon, and then 2 lectures on Bible translations. And it was like a bomb that exploded. It was consternation like you cannot believe. Now remember, all of these students are at a theological seminary. They're being trained to be pastors. And they come to me and they say, no, everything you're saying is absolutely wrong, because look, here's our textbooks. And they showed me their textbooks, and there it says that the received text is the very worst text to base your Bible translation on. In other words, you must accept those manuscripts that were found in waste paper baskets, right? And that the Vatican used.
Yeah.
And Ellen White in The Spirit of Prophecy is absolutely clear that Rome would change the Bible, and that the Waldenses were the ones that had the true manuscripts. And the manuscripts that Erasmus had, they were the ones that corrected the errors of the previous ones that were available, like the Vulgate. And this was exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So what I was saying was exactly the opposite of what they taught at that university. And so there was huge consternation. And I sat down with those students afterwards, and we took the Bible, and I said, let's read. And I had written in the back of my Bible all the changes, and they were astounded. But of course, the fury of that university leadership was beyond explanation. And as a consequence of the furor, they decided, the whole leadership of Germany decided that that was a reason to have me banned from speaking. So I was banned to speak in Germany.
In the country.
In the country, yes. So that was my first time that they banned me from ever speaking again in in Germany in an Adventist environment. Now, what did that create? It created a debate, right?
Exactly.
And here a debate started not only in Germany, but in the entire world regarding this issue. And today, if you read The Spirit of Prophecy, and especially those manuscripts that have been released recently, and we've dealt with it in a previous WhatsApp, you can put a link back into that one, where it is absolutely crystal clear that the Spirit of Prophecy says that the true manuscripts were in the hands of the Waldenses and Erasmus, and therefore are the manuscripts that corrected the errors of the previous ones.
Yeah.
But many of the theologians in the world, not only at that university, but at many of our institutes, were teaching the exact opposite. Now, this causes a debate, Martin. Since then, many books have been written, not only Wilkinson. I mean, there are many books in the world.
Yeah.
I have a whole shelf full of them, and I've read them all. And to me, it is absolutely incomprehensible, especially if you read the studies of the committee of the Schlachter Bible, for example, and the research that they did before they brought that Bible out. And the result is that many, many people returned to the received text.
Yes.
And this created much consternation. I have two books here that were written subsequently to Wilkinson. These are two that come out of the pens of Adventists. This one is by Martin Klein, and it's Above All Thy Name. It's a very, very interesting book about Bible translations. And a recent one that just came out is by Miloslav Dunka. And we must find out what his webpage is so that we can refer people to put some links in it. And it's called The Word of God versus Modern Bible Versions, History of the Original and Its Counterfeits. So this debate was opened up within the church. Now, I was, of course, also called into higher echelons within the church to be informed that this was not a very wise thing to do, to open this can of worms, which historically brought me back to some of the events of the past and how this whole thing has been addressed. And I do not recall ever having read a fundamental belief that I may not believe the received text, which was used by all the reformers and by the spirit of prophecy.
Yes.
Why should I not be able to believe that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is no fundamental belief on that issue, so there should be no reason to tell me that I cannot accept one or the other. And nobody has the right to decide for me or anyone else what they should believe on the issue. If you have something to say, present your facts.
Yes, that you can get a discussion.
And get the discussion going. And this is exactly what happened. You can do nothing against the truth. All right, it took a little bit of a conflagration to create the debate, but the debate went worldwide. And today there are people on both sides of the issue, and that's fine. Everybody must decide for themselves where they stand on the issue. And we're not going to go to war on it. But as for me and my house, I will make one decision and somebody else might make the alternative decision. So I've never retracted what I said, even though it was requested that I retract. In fact, the leadership in Europe called me in and told me what I was not allowed to speak about. So I was not allowed to speak about all plant-based diet. I'm terribly sorry, because the spirit of prophecy tells me the opposite.
Yeah.
Then I was told my view on the papacy is outdated. And I mean, there were articles written by conference presidents and union presidents in magazines stating quite plainly that that is outdated 19th century thinking and that it shouldn't be tolerated within the church. Well, that's that president's opinion, and his opinion is contrary to the spirit of prophecy, and therefore I can ignore him.
And it's also contrary to the official church stand on it.
Correct. Then it's always strange to me that when these leaders write these things and say these things, they're not banned. No, they're not banned. They continue in their positions of power, but they're not Seventh-day Adventists. They are not of us, although they are in us. And this is how you must see it. But the interesting thing, Martin, is that that president might say that, but the other one will say the exact opposite. So it doesn't make the entire leadership apostate. It just refers to those individuals. And the same when it comes to all of these issues. They told me I may not speak against trade unions. This is a union president who tells me I'm not allowed to speak about trade unions. And I said to him, but the spirit of prophecy says that the trade unions will be one of the means to bring about a time of trouble such as never was, and that we should have nothing to do with them, that our very souls are in peril if we associate with these organizations. You're not allowed to warn people about that? And he said, not in Germany. So I said to him and his group that were there, I said, it's very strange. All right, I'll make a deal with you. I won't say it in Germany on one condition, that you say that the blood is on your head. If people don't hear this and are actually lost because of it, it's on your head. Do you know what they did? They went and huddled in a corner over there and had a little brief discussion on it and then came back and said, it's fine.
It sounds like Israel when they crucified Jesus. His blood be on our...
His blood be on our head. I was absolutely stunned. Now, I've had many nerve-wracking experiences like that. And the interesting thing is that the controversy, even while I was banned, didn't go away, right? It raged within the church because it opened up a debate.
Yeah.
And this is the crux of the matter. You can do nothing against the truth. You can only do something for the truth. It's always like that. And so eventually, after a number of years or whatever it was, they, because of pressure, probably unbanned me. So I was allowed to speak again until the next exciting episode happened. So, there were always those that were looking for a reason why I should not speak. Secret societies is one of their pet hates. So the issues are always the same. It's the 6,000-year age of the earth and the statements in the spirit of prophecy regarding time. It's the question of the position of the papacy, whether the papacy has changed. In fact, when this overseeing body within the church that has to deal with doctrinal issues confronted me on the Bible translations, and I would send them, our correspondence is unbelievable. I would send them the information that I have. They would write back to me and say that the Rome that we are dealing with is not the same Rome. Right? This is problematic.
Yeah, because the spirit of prophecy clearly says Rome does not change.
Does not change. And anybody who lessens the distance between themselves and Rome is a backsliding church. Then they would write back to me and they would say, the Roman Catholic Church has no interest in changing Christology. And I wrote back to them and I said, excuse me, no interest in changing Christology? But they put mediators such as Mary and saints in the place of Jesus Christ. They say that the atonement was not for us. It was just an act of obedience, but it didn't atone for our sins. They are against the doctrine of justification and they have no desire to change the Christology. Eventually it got to the point where I said, we have absolutely nothing in common in terms of this way of thinking. So thank you very much for your opinion, but no thank you. I'll keep my opinion. So this is how it happened.
Yeah.
But within those same bodies, there are people that are absolutely faithful to the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. It depends on who you are dealing with.
Yes, it's the church. It's a history has shown us that it's inside the church, both parties.
Correct. Now, while all this was going on, they were, of course, deciding at one stage to print the Great Controversy and to hand that out. Now, knowing the sentiment of many of these people that I'd met, it was obvious to me that this was going to be a war, right? And one of the leaders in Europe, in Germany, who was part of this ecumenical gathering or ecumenical council that they were in, wrote an article and lamented the fact that we should be, in this day and age, be handing out outdated books like The Great Controversy. And what had happened was, in one of these meetings, the Roman Catholic delegate had come to him and said to him, all right, you're a Seventh-day Adventist, but you people hand out the Great Controversy. And you're sitting here in this council, and do you still believe that my church, the Roman Catholic Church, is the whore of Babylon? And so he lamented the fact in his article that we should have such outmoded and outdated negative documentation that we were still willing to hand out.
Because it's putting him in a bad light.
Correct. And he said that he was so flabbergasted he didn't know what to say. And so he felt, terribly bad that we as a denomination should believe such things. And I still thought to myself, what an opportunity. Because many years ago, I also was asked to represent our church here in South Africa at a meeting that had been called, not with that we were members or anything, but was kind of an ecumenical meeting to be called about the situation in South Africa and what the churches could do, and I was to represent them. And they wanted to vote on certain actions that had to be taken. And every single hand went up to vote on a particular issue, except mine. And they were very upset. All eyes immediately, I mean, you do feel very strange, right? Yeah. You're sitting there and all eyes suddenly are on you. And they looked at me and they said, and you, why are you not voting? So I said to them, well, I'm not voting because I don't have the right to vote. I'm here to represent the church, but I cannot make decisions for the church. I haven't been empowered with that position, with that authority. The church has to make this decision. So I have to take it back to them and say, this is what they want. They want us to vote on this issue. Then we can make this decision. And they were talking about issues about how the church must dictate to the state as to what must happen. And I said, and by the way, if I may say something, you are talking about telling the state what to do. Now you are all Protestants and different religions here, and I know that all of you stand for Sunday rest, and I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. So if I vote along with you now, and then it comes to the point where you want to introduce Sunday legislation, then we would be on opposite sides of the table. So how would we deal with that? So that opened a discussion over there amongst all those people. It was an opportunity, yes, right? You can do nothing against the truth. You can only do something for the truth. It was very uncomfortable. And I was sweating profusely. But it was an opportunity. Yeah. And you know what they said? They said, if you become a member of our organization, then we could protect you.
If you're not sorry.
If you're not sorry. And I thought, okay, thank you very much. That is exactly what I would expect. So I thought about this man who wrote this article, and I thought, what an opportunity. He could have said to the man, my dear friend, I have nothing against you personally, and I have nothing against Roman Catholics. Many are faithful people that want to do what is right. But here's my question. Do you still teach that there are mediators other than Jesus Christ? Can you approach Mary in a mediatorial position, or any of the saints? If your answer is yes, well, then we can move to the next point. Do you still teach that the Mass is a literal sacrifice, the same identical sacrifice that happened on the cross? Do you still teach that in the light of the Bible saying that by one sacrifice he has forever made perfect? Do you teach that Jesus Christ didn't die for us, but died as an example of obedience, and that you still have to attain through your good works? Do you still believe that? And you go through the doctrines, and then you say, as a consequence of that, you are not in harmony with the Bible. And the Bible calls that spiritual adultery. Yes. So in terms of your doctrine, I'm afraid we are not on the same page. But as a person, that's a totally different thing. That would have been a witness. Yeah. He had an opportunity. No, he laments that we're handing out the great controversy. And so they finally did reduce the great controversy to the size of a postage stamp and handed that out, having taken out every reference to the papacy as the beast or any one of those issues, claiming that you should actually come out of Babylon, but failing to define who Babylon is. It's a totally useless document. And this is the result of this kind of thinking. If you have a truth, Martin, you have to stand for it.
Absolutely.
And if you stand for it, God opens the doors.
Yes.
And that which he wants to become an issue of debate, even through the circumstances which are uncomfortable to both parties, and in terms of conflict, and painful to the extreme, if the debate opens up and people make decisions, then God has achieved his purpose.
Yeah.
Whether the one side is right or the other side is right is then an issue of debate within the church as a body. And this is what the shaking is all about. This quote comes from the Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 4, page 423. In every generation, God has sent his servants to rebuke sin, both in the world and in the church. But the people desire smooth things to be spoken to them, and the pure, unvarnished truth is not acceptable. Many reformers, in entering upon their work, determined to exercise great prudence in attacking the sins of the church and the nation. They hoped, by the example of a pure Christian life, to lead the people back to the doctrines of the Bible. But the Spirit of God came upon them as it came upon Elijah, and they could not refrain from preaching the plain utterances of the Bible, doctrines which they had been reluctant to present. They were impelled to zealously declare the truth and the danger which threatened souls. The words which the Lord gave them they uttered, fearless of consequences, and the people were compelled to hear the warning. Martin, this has been the way in which God has dealt throughout the ages. And if somebody gets up and preaches something, then God is opening up an avenue of discussion. If that something is blatantly wrong, it will be revealed that it is blatantly wrong.
Yes.
If it is not blatantly wrong, but contains truth, then that truth will not fall to the ground. That seed will not return empty.
Yes.
So this is the way in which people within this church must decide what is right and what is wrong. I cannot listen to something because so-and-so said it. Whether that person is a leader in the church or whether that person is a lay person in the church, irrespective. I have to judge it on the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy. The same applies to anything that I or any other evangelist has to say. We are not the Talmud of this church. We are not a creed for this church. We are just people speaking what we have discovered in the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy. And if it holds water, and if it is in harmony with the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy, then buy it.
Yes.
And if it is not, then reject it.
Correct. That's what we do.
Correct. So it's not my job to go and ban those people in leadership and tell them that they are banned from speaking. My personal opinion is that if they say these things, then they are not in harmony with the spirit of Adventism. But that doesn't make my church Babylon.
No. Don't boycott the church because of the leaders or any apostasy.
Correct.
We want the church back to what it's supposed to be.
I want my church back. C.D. Brooks preached that. And I concur. I want my church back. I don't want this modern stuff. I don't want the spiritual formation because it destroys your mind. It takes your mind away from the truth and puts you on a road of liturgy and activity and keeps you jumping up and down. Physical exercise profiteth little. I want my church back. I want my church to believe in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. I was in a place, I'll tell that in another story. I was in a place where I didn't want to go, but I ended up there anyway.
You definitely have to tell that one.
I'll tell that next time. And there was a lady, and she had a theme song every night. And the theme song went something like, God said it, and I believe it, and that's the way it is.
That settles it.
That settles it for me. That's it. And it sort of stuck in my mind, and it's become an axiom. My favorite verse in all the Bible is, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not on thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths.
Amen.
Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, sometimes this road is so rocky and so painful. But Lord, it is a road that leads to eternity. Help us not to reject truth because it is painful. Help us not to reject truth because the road is rocky. Help us to embrace truth that you make prominent through the rocky road. Bless us as we continue our discussions, and may you bless your church. And may you bring many, many, many to lead others to the path of life. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for watching this video. To subscribe to our channel, click here. To get notifications, click on the bell. To watch the next video, click here. Thank you, and we'll see you again.